Mike Pryke is a seasoned mentor at Oneday and co-founder of Qualifyr, a cutting-edge VC-backed PropTech scale-up. With a storied career that spans over 17 years, including pivotal roles as Chief Revenue Officer at Guider and founder of the successfully exited venture Pitt Cue, Mike brings a wealth of real-world experience to the table. But of course, it wasn't that seamless and smooth and successful, was it, Mike?
No, definitely not. And I think one of the things I'm really keen on as a founder, someone who's worked in the entrepreneurial community for some time is like you say, Steph, right? Like telling the true story of what it's like to found a business, and that it's not. I think there's this real pressure on founders, people I call capital F founders, right? Who spell founder with a capital F, who are, really, really keen on presenting themselves as on this like very linear upright trajectory. So going always to that top right corner on the graph. And that's just not, certainly not in my experience, and certainly not the experience of any founder I've worked with or worked alongside or spoken to honestly over a coffee or a beer or whatever. That's not really what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm really skeptical and really cynical about this kind of capital F founder culture. And I've always really tried to like debunk a lot of that. And I do it with my founders here at Oneday. I see a few of them in the room, terrifyingly. It's always harder when there's founders in the room.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do it with my founders as well. So like you can't always expect for things to be like 5 steps forward every kind of month or whatever. There's always a couple of backward steps. There's some, turnarounds, and I mean we call them pivots for a reason, right? So yeah, it's definitely not been a straightforward journey, and I've made so many mistakes. It was very difficult to pick just three. And I've tried to choose like three big ones, or like a mistake that symbolizes a group of mistakes that I made, like in a kind of a particular area. And yeah, then there's like some funny mistakes that I've made that maybe we'll touch on, but some big ones too.
All right, amazing. So let's end in the same way with my podcast with the traditional closing question with one big tragedy. So let's leave that one to the end. So we've got a juicy one for people as a reward for sticking around and staying with
Yeah.
us over the
Okay.
next kind of 30, 40 minutes. Also, just to let everyone know, there'll be time for audience Q&A at the end. So listen to what Mike has to say. If there's anything that didn't quite make sense or you want to double click into it, or anything that he hasn't covered, pop that on the chat as well, the Q&A, and we'll get around to that afterwards. So let's leave the big one to the end, Mike. I think we should do the funny, let's sandwich the funny stuff in the middle.
Yeah.
And so what's the one left that we want to start off with?
Well, okay. So I'm going to start yeah. So I had my first business when I was 19.
Wow.
I was an undergraduate at university, and I founded a business called Fine Fodder. It was a food and drink magazine. You know, had no experience. At 19, you're very green. I wasn't a sort of prodigious business genius. I was studying literature at university. So it wasn't like I had a sort of business background. I'd always been a bit entrepreneurial. I'd always had that kind of Del Boy, for those in the States, that's like a very sort of market trader spirit. But yeah, so I set this business up, and I just got everything wrong, from incorporating the business to, you know, not knowing that you had to pay VAT. So I had to go and ask my grandmother to lend me my first VAT bill. Otherwise, I was going to get in loads of trouble. She had to go and draw down from her pension to lend me the cash because I was
Yeah.
waiting for invoices to be paid.
Mhm.
And like, I think the big mistake that underpins all of those little mistakes, some of them very structural and procedural, was not knowing that I needed help and not knowing that I needed advice. And I went to school, I went to a very traditional English boarding school in the countryside, and it was highly competitive and very kind of like, you would never show a sign of weakness. I'm sure it's very different now, but I'm very old, so I went to school a long time ago, and it was a bit like, looked like Hogwarts, but was a bit more like Colditz, like sort of prisoner of war camp. And I spent a long time there kind of being really kind of feeling very kind of competitive about everything. And so I think it was part of imposter syndrome, like inherently knowing that I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't have the kind of ability or the guts to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. And we were turning over, between 7 and 8 million pounds a year within 3 years, and doing extraordinarily well, selling advertising in this magazine. And I was basically doing almost everything myself.
That's insane, Mike. Can I just start? You said 7 to 8 million pound turnover.
Yeah.
How long did it take for you to get to that revenue level?
About 3 years, and I sold the business after
Wow.
4. So it
Wow.
was pretty fast growing, and I was studying full time while doing this, right? So it was like, I was doing a full-time degree. But I did, like I say, when I say in year one, I did have a team by the third year, but like I was doing everything myself. In year one, I hand delivered, 10,000 magazines out the back of my Peugeot
So
206.
this is just incredible, Mike. So how did you manage to generate, let's say, let's round it up, 8 million pounds worth of revenue from a magazine? Was this pure advertising?
Yeah, advertising and sponsorship deals. So we were, you know, doing between 8 and 12 issues a year, selling hundreds of pages of advertising, still managing to undercut all the kind of the bigger digital, like the bigger kind of media players at the time, like Archant, who run, Essex Life and Hertfordshire Life, and those guys, who I actually sold the business to eventually. And it was just like I don't really know how I got there, especially since like in year one, I was doing all the advertising sales myself. I was still leading on the big kind of partnerships. So we had big partnership with all like Marco Pierre White's restaurants, because he's from Yorkshire and that's where the business was based. We ended up like, it was supposed to be about like independent food and drink, and this is one of the kind of compromises that you have to make, I think, when you run a business, is like didn't want to lose the spirit of that. So we ended up with a partnership with like Waitrose and John Lewis, and part of the John Lewis partnership, but really spotlighting. We would only let them advertise the independent producers they stocked. So we really kept those, like tried to keep those lines in. And this was, as I say, a long time ago. Facebook didn't really have advertising. There was no social media advertising at the time. So this wasn't, print was an easy alternative. There was also lots of digital marketing that people were doing in 2007, 2008, but not, it wasn't like as easy. It wasn't as accessible to smaller businesses. Um,
Just
and
on
yeah,
that,
sorry, go on.
sorry, I know that the title of this is the top mistakes, but let's dig into this story because this is fascinating. How much of this would you say was right time, right place? Because it sounds as though you had the tailwinds given that era, like starting a magazine, you didn't have this huge boom in performance marketing for all these other
Mhm.
advertisers. So did that play into your favor there to help make it a success?
Yeah, I think, yes is the short answer. The slightly more kind of complicated answer is like, you know, I don't know any business that's not like right place, right time. And I don't know many businesses that, lots of businesses rather, that fail because they're the wrong place at the wrong time. Launching in the wrong market, or the wrong, against a headwind rather than with a tailwind.
So this all sounds very successful. You went to, I'm processing the 8 million revenue in only a matter of years when, while you were studying, you were doing everything yourself, just insane. You had an exit. And yet the mistake that's come out of this was actually not asking for help or knowing that you needed help. So how was that detrimental to you against all these other successes that we've just described?
Well, because when I sold the business, it wasn't like a distressed sale in a kind of technical sense. There was no reason, but I sold it because I realized I was going to have to bring someone in to run it for me, and I was too arrogant to do that. And I think the business, there's a really exciting opportunity to move into digital media that we were planning. And, I had the ability to go and raise some investment. We had cash in loads of cash in the bank. It was really exciting. And basically, I realized that at whatever I was, 24 when I sold the business, 25, like I was not clever, and I didn't have the experience enough to run that level of business. I was going to have to bring in an MD, or like
Right.
some CEO, whatever. I probably would have called it an MD because I wasn't so obsessed with American startups back then. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
bring in someone to run it for me. And I just, like, my arrogance got in the way of that, and I couldn't kind of do it. And I think,
Hmm.
for me, it's like the pattern, the pattern of all that. What it essentially led to, Steph, is I undersold the business. And I took a large amount of money, but what a large amount of money is to a 25-year-old as opposed to what the business was probably worth.
Yeah.
you know, where I should have been getting a proper multiple of EBITDA. We were profitable, but like overheads were high because I wasn't running it very efficiently. But you know, so for the founders listening, you know, often when you sell a business, it's on a multiple of your EBITDA, which is basically your kind of earnings before interest, tax, etc., etc. I can never remember what they would stand for. But you know, like it's you know, whenever I have told anyone the number, and I don't particularly want to like talk about it now because it's a bit upsetting and b a bit vulgar, is you know, they're always shocked because I undersold it. But it was a good, you know, it was a good exit. Really happy about it. You know, I don't have kind of, I genuinely don't have regrets. But you know, one of the things I do think about a lot is like, if only I'd listened, if only I'd found a mentor, if only I'd found someone who knew what they were doing, and like, you know, even in company valuations, right? Because I just was like, yeah, that's loads of money. I'm 24. I can like, that's great. Let's do that. And I just did it, you know.
Mike, this is absolutely fascinating. This is, one of the many reasons I was so excited for this, to learn more about your story, which we never get a chance to day to day. I think, it's great to look back and have those, lessons learned. But I mean, what teenager, early 20-year-old, you've got to earn your stripes, you've got to have those scars, you've got to put your finger in the flame to know you get burned. And to be honest, I mean, let's get some answers here on the chat. Please, everyone, keyboards at the ready. Like, who here thinks that it's incredibly successful to have exited a business before the age of 25, let alone 30? So I think, let's keep the lens firmly focused on these were the lessons learned. But I think it's also incredibly important. I just have to say to you as well, Mike, I mean, kudos to you. Like, I bow down to you. You built a multi-million-pound turnover, a profitable business. Sure, it could have been more profitable. Sure, you could have had more revenue. And you exited before the age of 25. I think that is incredible. Thank you, Samantha. She says that's an amazing accomplishment. Honestly, I have to just, one more thing before we move on from that is just, I did not even know the concept. I mean, this is for the founders here on the group as well. Like, as silly as it sounds to say out loud, I did not know that businesses got bought and sold until I was, I don't know, not even really that long ago. I think I would have been like in my early 30s. So I was like, oh, wait, like I knew it was mergers and acquisitions, but I was like, I don't really know what that is. I didn't even realize that small businesses, particularly non-tech, VC-backed, scalable businesses, I think I knew about that, but I think I had a marketing agency myself. Mike's obviously just described one of his first business in media. It's like, oh, okay, you can
Mm.
actually sell these businesses. I didn't even realize that was an opportunity. So not only that, but you went and did it before the age of 25. I think that's incredible, Mike. All right, so let's move on. So the lesson here is ask for help when you need it. Should we move on to the funny stuff, Mike?
Yeah, well, I think I would just what I think just one more thing on that. I know I should let you control this, Steph, but
It's fine, go for it.
I think just one more thing on that is like the thing that I really want the founders here to take away is, and I know it's a bit outdated now, but this idea of the growth mindset has been so powerful for my personal development, and the way I conceive of it is not that radical, but like the idea that you know, rather than trying to be the cleverest person in the room, which was always my intention, try and make yourself the stupidest person in the room, and try and like I still find it really bad. My muscle is still not like very well trained even after like nearly 20 years of this, but like, you know, try to ask the stupid question, try to, you know, weaponize your naivety, particularly as a founder, because like you've got this amazing ability, all the founders in the room here, to like, you know, challenge the status quo. And that comes from often being the stupidest person in the room, or the person with the least knowledge, and not sitting on your hands and trying to be the cleverest. I think Richard Branson is so powerful on this. Like, you know, I don't like venerate him or anything. I'm not sort of one of those kind of Necker Island worshippers, but like there's that story he tells, and I looked it up to remind myself of it. It's actually on his blog from like 2019 when he was in his 50s and he didn't know the difference between gross profit and net profit as a billionaire. And he was in a board meeting in his 50s, and his CFO had to take him out the room and explain it to him because he just said to the board, like, I don't know the difference. And you know, that, I mean, he's very open about his dyslexia and his neurodiversity and neurodivergence and stuff, which I think is really great. But that I think is such a great lesson to have as a founder. Like, and it's, you know, actually I don't, you know, I have a lot of imposter syndrome, and I have a lot of like, you know, Steph, you're so good on your social media, like your LinkedIn's so great, and so like you've got such a great voice, and with your podcast and stuff. And I really struggle with that. Like, I'm working on it at the moment. It's one of my projects for the summer is to like, get better at it. And it took me nearly 15 years to put exited founder on my on my LinkedIn profile. I just didn't do it. I just wasn't like, it just wasn't part of my persona. And I think anyway, but all of this is like about being vulnerable and opening yourself up and like having that growth mindset.
Love that. I love that. I feel like we could go in so many different directions here and have another like hour-long chat just on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the compliment. I love that. And I put in the chat, I just wanted to underscore that soundbite of yours. Weaponize your naivety. What a great soundbite from, you heard it here first, from Mike Pryke, the One Day community event. No, I love it. I mean, even me just now, just admitting to like not even knowing that businesses got bought and sold. Like, yeah, we can go off on a tangent, but you don't know what you don't know. And with my squad as well, with my cohort, I always I don't know if any of them are here on the call today, but I always, time and time and time again, I say there is no such thing as a stupid question.
Mm.
And always, whenever that step, I'm really embarrassed to ask, but what's there? I'm like, actually, that's a great question. And I think it's a small price to pay for the knowledge that you gain, a small price to pay of looking. I mean, the other thing is like, what's going to happen? What, you're going to look like a fool? Who's really going to think that? There's a very high chance that half of the rest of the room also doesn't know the answer to that question.
That's it. That's what I always say. It's like if you're thinking it, it's
Yeah.
all certainly because something like you or I in a squad meeting as mentors haven't explained something quite right, or we've made a logical leap because we're more familiar with the material. So there's definitely someone else who's thinking, someone ask the question,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, yeah.
Be that person to ask it. Like, and I'm still like a lot of the time, like I have to really train myself. If someone's like, "Have you got any questions?" I often
Mm.
like my instinct is to say, "No, I'm all right." Like I've kind of because I'm so clever. Of course, I've understood what you've thought,
Yeah,
what you've said.
yeah.
It's actually like I have to train myself to like ask those questions. But actually, no, I don't understand that.
On
Could you?
that note, all right, gang, everyone listening in on the chat, things at the ready, please put in. Let's just give you a moment to think about it as well. Give you a moment to think about a stupid question. Is it Sablé? I think you pronounce Sablé. Magdalene, great to see you here. Um, I mean, that's an example of a stupid question, isn't it, Mike? Right?
Yeah,
But
like well,
it's
I
not
guess
a,
I guess yeah, it's a question Sable that is like that exposes you that exposes that you don't know something,
there
right? I
is
think that's the big thing.
there is no such thing as, I guess it's more to clarify is for whatever reason, Mike was mentioning imposter syndrome before. So whether it's imposter syndrome or any other kind of self-doubt or any other internal monologue you've got going on, it's something getting in the way of like, oh, I shouldn't ask this question because maybe I should already know the answer. Maybe am I the only one who doesn't know this? So everyone, please, on the chat, take a moment to think about one stupid question that you'd like to ask me. You're like, I've heard of this acronym. Mike mentioned VAT before. Obviously, we're in the
Mm.
UK. That's a British thing. He also mentioned Del Boy. I think that was a very British reference. I'm not
It
sure if I
was, it
remember
was, it
it.
was.
But please put out a stupid question. We'll just give you a few moments to think about that. And let's just get some of that interactivity going. All right, while that's happening, Mike, I'll let you think about I really want to go on to the funny stuff. So I'll come to you in just a second once people start chatting.
I think we've got well the funny story is tied a bit to a scenario in the kind of biggest tragedy. So I might have to keep you waiting a bit longer for the funny stuff.
Ah,
Because where there's tragedy, there's comedy, right? But yeah, there's another big mistake which I think is a good lesson.
okay, all right. So we're going to do the big mistake first.
Well, no, we're gonna do it, and they're all bigger. This is a bigger mistake, I think, but it's got there's a funny interaction in it, and then there's
Okay. All right. Well, nothing's coming through in the chat. I really hope that that's just because people's minds are blank and you can't think of anything to ask, and not because you think of a question. We have just had one in. Sorry, I know people need time to type as well. John, how are you getting over your imposter syndrome when it comes to social media? What are you practically doing about it? That's a great question.
yeah, I think it is a good question. I think for me, I'm doing a number of things. The first is I think I'm really trying to identify like what do I have a voice on and where should I have a voice and like where do I feel most authentic kind of talking, and I think that's really important. I have realized, as you gathered from that first story, that I'm not good at everything. And I think really acknowledging that and not trying to be a voice on everything will be really helpful. Secondly, I'm gonna, in fact, Steph, I reached out to Maya, who was on your podcast last week, and I'm meeting with her, and I might be starting to see a coach, and starting
Amazing.
to, yeah. So I'm really, really grateful for that connection. If I saw on your podcast, so yeah, I'm meeting with Maya on Wednesday actually to go through the kind of coaching strategy. I think that's going to help me like get that. So I think seeking that external support again, like acknowledging I need it and seeking it, I think is going to help. But really, John, I think the most practical step for me is to kind of be authentic and find my lane and just stick to my lane, which is really nowadays early stage businesses finding product market fit and building out commercial structures and commercial teams. So I think that's what and that's very broad. I need to find like sub niches within that, but like that's definitely my lane.
Nice, nice. And then just one more from Ethan before we get into the funny stuff. Why is your social media presence so important when there's other avenues to get you seen? That's another great question. Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know is the answer. Like and maybe this is something that I have been interrogating because there was a time when I had quite a big like Twitter following, nearly 10 years ago, and I actually part of my third story, but I deleted that account and moved away. I was a sort of micro influencer before there were micro influencers. And on my LinkedIn now, I have lots and lots of followers. Someone told me in an event last year I'm a nano influencer on LinkedIn, which I was a bit disappointed by. But I didn't realize it went down that small. But I've got to. But I think John, it's like for me, it's about having a voice and being able to express that voice, and social media seems a good place to do it. Like lots of my potential clients now, I'm a consultant, live and live and die on LinkedIn. So it seems like that's a good place, and Twitter or X is a good place for me to kind of have a voice. But I think it's also good for for those of you who are going through the course, you've either have done this or you'll be coming up to it. Establishing credibility is really important, particularly when you're a kind of one person band like I am these days. I've got my little company, that I work from, but it's a self-named company, and it's just me. And I think it's important to establish some of that credibility.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much, Mike. There's similar-ish kind of question, I think, from Samantha Carey. So hopefully, Samantha, that's kind of answered that. I'm just conscious that we've got the Q&A at the end as well. So this was a little bit of a digression around kind of no such thing as a stupid question. But I think these are all great questions for Mike that we'll get round to towards the end, especially that one from John, actually, if you were 19 again, what you would do over. So let's come back to those. So thank you so much for the questions. All right, Mike, let's get into the funny stuff.
Yeah, well, I feel the pressure now because the funny stuff. But I want to jump to a kind of a particular mistake that again is I've made a similar mistakes throughout my career, but one that is important, which is around kind of getting into bed with the wrong people on a kind of business, from a business sense. And lots of the founders in the room will be thinking about co-founders maybe, or eventually be thinking about investors. And there's two stories, but I don't know if I'll be indulged with two. But there's one that I've kind of made notes about and that I'll go through first. So a later business I had after I sold my first business, we set up me and some friends set up a restaurant business, started as a food truck on the South Bank in by the River Thames in London. We did a summer residency there, and then we grew it and got a physical site in Soho. And then we sold that business in 2014. So that was like 2011 to 2014. And the guys who bought it off us went and basically ruined it. I didn't like it during our kind of earn out. I wasn't very happy with the direction they were taking it. So it's a barbecue restaurant. Really briefly, we had a very strong brand. You did three things: barbecue, bourbon, and beer. So barbecue food, American whiskey and beer. You couldn't have a glass of wine. You couldn't have a gin and tonic. Like for me, strong brands say no. Steph, you're a marketer. You know this, right? The strongest brands say no. The biggest brand strategies say no. And we said no a lot in this restaurant. And when they moved the restaurant from Soho, which is very kind of artsy and creative in central London, to the city, which is financial and lots of insurance brokers and bankers. And as soon as they moved it to the city, they started getting questions like, "What do you mean I can't have a glass of wine with my meal? And what do you mean I can't have a gin and tonic?" And so they started serving gin. And I said, this is a mistake. This is a mistake. And then I said, you shouldn't serve wine, you shouldn't serve gin. We do barbecue, bourbon, and beer. It's in our DNA. That's what we are. Anyway, the guys who bought it from us, there were lots of extenuating circumstances. It wasn't all their fault. I think they made some bad decisions, but the business went into liquidation in 2019, so before the pandemic. But they put it into voluntary liquidation, so that means the business kind of wasn't working. So they basically made the business bankrupt. So you collapse the business, walk away with probably not very much, if anything, as the owners of the business. And so me and my co-founder, my original founder, we bought the business out of liquidation. We bought the brand and we bought all the assets for £10,000. So like $13,000 in 2019. And there was a customer was a customer, and he was a private equity guy. And he said, "Oh, I was going to buy the brand, but I didn't when I heard you guys were buying it, because we ran all the kind of under old management, like kind of lots of stuff on the social media about the restaurant." And this guy said, I'll give you £10,000 each if you cut me in as a partner. So there we were. We bought it for £10,000. We could double our money essentially by bringing in a partner and still retain. Like, I can't even do the maths in my head, but basically end up with a third of the business and our money back, doubled. So, and he seemed like a nice guy. We did our kind of due diligence. We spoke to some of his other kind of investments, his private equity investments. He's got some in coffee shops and stuff, and yeah, we were like, yeah, let's do that. He seems like he promised us he was going to invest more money. He promised he was going to help us get the restaurant back on its feet, and all of that kind of stuff. And long story short, he's an asshole. He's an absolute not the person we thought he was. And part of the kind of agreement we put in place, and this is another mistake, right? Like being a bit foolhardy and a bit strong-headed, and it's a lot of money, but it seemed like such a good deal to get our money back. And it was a bit kind of, basically we put an agreement in place to protect ourselves, really, that any agreement had to be unanimous between the three of us. And that was to protect, actually, if my co-founder had gone off with the investor, I couldn't be rolled, and vice versa. But actually, what we didn't think is we should have kept the two of us. It should have been the majority of us and excluded him. And he's basically just blocking us from doing anything at the moment. So we want to start a new, we went through the pandemic, we did restaurant boxes, we did a big collaboration with the barbecue manufacturer, Big Green Egg. We got a deal, we had a cookbook, we had a kind of, one of the top selling cookbooks of the 2010s from our restaurant. And we've got a deal. We were told we could write another cookbook if we had a restaurant. We had retail partnerships going if we had a restaurant. Everything was waiting to go. He will not let us start a restaurant. He won't let us trade as a restaurant business. Now, let's not go down the pathway of why the restaurant business is a disaster. And I think it's probably it would be hard to do another restaurant, but I think we could do something. And he's just blocking us. And so we said, well, look, completely understand you don't want to get in the restaurant industry. Don't know why you invested in the restaurant business, but whatever. We'll buy you out. How much do you want for your third? And he said, oh, I want £150,000 for his third. So we were like, what if he thinks a third of the business is worth 150? We'll sell. So we were like, okay, we'll sell you our shares. And how much will you pay us? And he said, I'll give you 10K each. So he would sell at 150, but he'd buy at 10.
Convenient.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're stuck. And I've got this company that we can't do anything with. We've got this kind of, amortizing brand. We get 30 or 40 Facebook and Instagram messages a week saying, when are you opening again? Come back, come back. I know we could make it successful. Had partnerships with Soho House, and we did a big residency at Soho Farmhouse. We've done so much cool stuff. The brand is so cool and the food was so good. But because of this series of small bad decisions about who we got into bed with, we're locked out of our own business, and it's basically valueless. Yes, I made my money, but I'm not at a financial loss. But for me, it's a kind of real shame. And yeah, sorry, I talked for ages about that, but yeah, that's the kind of story of that, next big mistake.
What could you have done to take that due diligence to another level? Because I know this is a really tricky one. When you go in, when you deal with new people, we always have the best intentions, and especially if people are putting their best foot forward, they're making a good first impression, you want to trust that person, you want to believe, you get excited, there's money on the cards as well. Why wouldn't you? You think, okay, well, I've done some due diligence in terms of speaking to his other, owners of his other investing companies. You've
Mm.
spoken to some other people, you got your references. So there's an element of, innocent until proven guilty. So what else could you have done? Is it one of those things, or could you have mitigated that risk somehow?
I think by the looks of it, we should have spoken to Kareem in the chat, because he's a lawyer who specializes in this kind of thing. So actually getting like some proper kind of advice when we were drawing up the Mems and Arts, and when we were, so our sort of memorandum of association and articles of association, which are the kind of legal documents governing the governing the kind of company, and just making sure that we were better protected. I think this is something, not trying to turn everything into a lesson for the founders in the room, but like, I think being really open, being honest about who's adding value where. So, making sure, I think we should have recognized our value to the business in the agreement more than him. And when it came to like voting shares as opposed to ownership shares and that kind of thing. And you're looking at a masterclass in this in the world of big tech, it's Zuckerberg, right? He still controls Facebook's board, even though it's a public company. Basically, his word is law. He can't be overruled on almost any company matter, because he's designed it that way. And I think that's something that, like, I wish that I'd have known more about, and I'd have been a bit cannier on. I'm very like I have a fundamental belief that people are good, and it's not. It's made me a bit kind of gullible sometimes, and I've had to, like, my cynicism muscle is one that I have to kind of like
Mm.
work on a bit more.
Well, I'm
Because
exactly the same, which is exactly where this question is coming from. I'm this, you want to see the best in people. You know it does, I don't comprehend why some people would go out of their way with those intentions of creating such, complicated messiness. So just to summarize your answer there, are you saying that, what you would have done differently, or the lesson there was actually to seek more legal counsel and invest a little bit more time, expertise, whatever, into getting the agreements right? Or is there any more that you could share in terms of the due diligence piece before you actually get into agreements with a partner?
yeah, I mean, I don't know really, because it's just hard, because we, you know, yeah, I think, we felt we'd done the due diligence. Like, there was, at the time, we felt like it was done. And
Yeah,
even with hindsight, I don't know off the top of my head like what more we could have done.
exactly.
We spoke to his investments, we spoke to the people who founded those companies. I still don't think he's a bad guy. I just don't think he believes in the restaurant industry. And then it's like, well, what? I think, another thing we should have done is got more money out of him up front, so that his like promise, oh, I'll give you this for the third of the company, and then I'll invest more money. That kind of verbal promise, I wish we'd not taken as a verbal promise, and that we'd actually formalized a bit more. And this is a big lesson for me, I think, in that kind of gullibility thing. And I still feel a bit embarrassed that this is the case. And this is an ongoing, like, we're not active in like litigation or anything. We've just kind of let it sit for a couple of years now, since we've actually done anything with this. But it's I'm a bit embarrassed. Here I am, like a seasoned entrepreneur. I've been sort of tricked. I've locked myself out of my own house, haven't I? I've locked myself out of my own company, and I don't have a kind of easy way to get back in.
Mike, I'm in a very privileged position of getting to interview seasoned entrepreneurs like yourself, exited founders, and I can tell you categorically, you are not the only one to have been through a similar experience. Many others have, and honestly, others have been through much, much worse. So don't beat yourself up. These things happen. Word of warning to the group here as well. Sometimes there is only a certain point that you can go with your due diligence before you start. In my view, I think before you do start affecting that relationship, because then it does start to get a little bit like, what the heck, is there zero trust here? There still has to be an element of trust, but really kind of get Karim's help, I guess, or the likes of Karim to help sort out the agreements, and I guess take your time to dot the I's, cross the T's, because once you've signed that, you're locked in, right?
Yeah, and I think if you do raise investment, and lots of you will at some point in your business journey or in your career journey, like, the emphasis is always the due diligence process by investors, particularly venture investors. You feel under scrutiny as an
Yeah.
investee, and it's all about them DDing you, them doing their due diligence on you. And actually that power dynamic is really, really unhealthy. You should be as equally as much
Yeah.
doing your due diligence on the investment firm. And that doesn't matter whether it's like, Andreessen Horowitz, like one of the biggest VC companies in the world, or if it's just like an angel investor that you've met on LinkedIn. So I really, I think your due diligence is vitally important as founders. Same with co-founders. Got a story about being screwed over by a not screwed over, but let down severely by a co-founder that cost us a couple of £100,000 in investment. And that was also because we didn't really interrogate him enough.
Yeah. Preach, Mike. Thank you so much for underscoring that power dynamic, especially, we talk about partners, co-founders, but on the investor side of things, I'll never forget the first person who shared a similar nugget, a similar pearl of wisdom on that front, which was like, because they're the ones who've got the money, you feel like there is that power imbalance, but
Yeah.
actually it's not true at all. You as the entrepreneur, you have the IP, you have the idea, you're the one putting in the energy. They've got money. Plenty of other VCs have got money. So remember that power balance. Mike, I'm sorry to hear about this other co-founder situation. Did you want to share that as well, or did you want to move on to a
I mean,
separate?
I can do just another kind of example for those of you who are looking for co-founders or might be. So me and so Qualifyr, the software business, which was doing okay, but actually we was a big failure of mine, like a business that didn't work out. We closed that down in 2021. It was a software business. Me and my original co-founder Leo, we'd worked together before. We're like best friends. His girlfriend, now wife, calls me his work girlfriend because we spend so much time together. Like I'm like the third person in their marriage. And we're both non-technical. So we had to bring on a technical co-founder, and we found someone who, again, was the CTO at the company my partner works for, my girlfriend. And so came from a recommendation, lovely guy. We get on so well with him, like had really, we did, again, all the kind of qualitative due diligence you can do. We sat down with him, we talked him through our plans, the kind of company we wanted to run. He was fully on board. He built a great MVP for us. And then we got on to Europe's biggest property technology accelerator, which comes with like a couple of £100,000 in investment, like a 12-week accelerator program. Would have been like game changing for us, would have, really genuinely kind of accelerated the business. I believe that. Part of that deal, we had to sign lots of kind of, go through the due diligence from the VC and sign lots of paperwork saying we wouldn't take other jobs, that, we would pay ourselves a very small salary, just like 35 grand a year, just almost like a stipend. Because that's what investors don't want to pay you to pay yourself. They want to pay you to grow the business. That's like, they're not really, they don't want to pay your salary. And so you think about this timeline, we've gone through all the due diligence, all these interviews, gone to the investment committee of the venture capital firm, which is like the last phase you go through before they give you the money. The program is due to start on the Monday. On the Thursday, they sent us the paperwork. The money would have hit the bank account on Friday. We sent the contract to this co-founder, and he was like, I can't sign it. I've accepted a job somewhere else. And what he hadn't told us is this was during the pandemic. This was like 2020, I think, or 2020. He had basically lost all his money in his Bitcoin investments, his crypto investments. He kept all this secret and private from us. His wife had left him. He was like going to lose his home. I fully understand this personal situation, but he just needed to have communicated that to us like 10 weeks before, when it was all still happening. And so I had to go back to these investors and say, look, we've lost our technical co-founder, but I think we can still do this. And they said no. And we burnt all the bridges with them. They would never invest in us again because they said they thought we'd misled them because we'd said he was a full co-founder, which to our minds he was. We'd cut him in, we'd given him like a big chunk of the business on paper. It was a full kind of thing for us. And it was just like, it was so. I remember getting the call to say we got on it on that Wednesday evening, quite late. I was watching TV in the living room with my partner, and I phoned my co-founder. I was like, "We got it, we got it, we got it! Oh my god, we got it!" And then on the Thursday, all the paperwork coming and sending it to this guy, and the co-founder just saying, "I can't. Sorry guys, I can't." He literally just slacked us and said, "I can't sign this because I just accepted a job." And like, yeah. So I guess like I don't know if there's a big learning there. It's just another example, I think, of like, you know the relationships you have with investors and with co-founders and with anyone coming into your business are so vital. You have to pick every last bit apart. But Steph, you're so right. Like, we have to be so careful not to overpick and offend and ruin the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's such a, I don't have a kind of, I wish I had a formula, like a magic thing I could give you guys to kind of use, but basically you have to go further than you're comfortable going, but not so far that you cock everything up, essentially.
I think that's a good rule of thumb, Mike. I'm sorry to hear that crazy story, and I'm astounded the amount of times I've heard similar tragedies, particularly on the technical side of things, a technical co-founder, CTO, which again we can talk about another time. For the sake of time, I'm aware that we've got just under kind of 15 minutes, and I
Yeah.
want to have some time for any questions that we didn't get around to. So please keep the questions coming in the chat. They're fantastic. I'm loving seeing the messages coming through. Mike, traditional closing question that I always use in my podcast. One tragedy that's taught you an unforgettable lesson. So, what's the final big mistake you'd like to share with our Oneday community this evening?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, again, probably the culmination of a series of smaller mistakes, but it sits very large in my rear view mirror. It's sort of 8 years ago now, or no, maybe 10, 11, no, 9, 10 years ago now. And it sits very large in my rear view mirror. And so after I sold that first business, I didn't know what I was going to do, right? So I did some random things. I ran a friend's nightclub for 6 months up in York. That was great fun. And then I sold artwork on board a cruise ship in the Caribbean for 9 months. I was just sort of like, I had a girlfriend at the time who was an arts director on Cunard Line, so I just went to the Caribbean and lived on a cruise
So
ship.
random,
So,
Mike.
I just was like, what do you do? You've got money in the bank. You can suddenly do what you're kind of a bit more kind of self-directed. I bought myself a Patek Philippe watch and a Porsche. I was like, what else do I need in the UK? Like, I was 25. Let's go to the Caribbean. Anyway, so but then I came back to London and I started working for a charity, for a non-profit. And it was originally like a kind of short-term contract that I was going to do to help a friend out who was working there. And I ended up being there for 4.5 years as commercial director. It's a very, very old, prestigious charity based in London, but with like global footprint, been around for over 100 years, works in education. And I was like the youngest person ever to be a director, as I think I said. And I was on I would be invited to board meetings. I had arguments with kind of members of the House of Lords over whether I should wear a tie to board meetings. It was that kind of place, like I did end up wearing a tie because they threatened to sack me if I didn't. So I did end up wearing a tie. But basically, we got this opportunity to run this massive commercial program education project in China with the kind of with the Chinese government as a partner, with a kind of Quango, so like a quasi-autonomous non-government body called the China National Committee for the Wellbeing of Youth, which is like a big youth-focused Quango over in China, the CNC. And so I was like, yeah, let's give that a go. I'll give it. Yeah, I've never been to China. That sounds fun. So I flew to Beijing and met with the kind of lead contact there, a guy called Mr. Du, Darwin Du, who was a noodle billionaire. So he'd made billions selling noodles in Hubei, which Wuhan actually he was based before it was famous. Yeah, basically for the next 3 years, I became the kind of project lead as well as my day job running all the commercial teams for the charity internationally. And I was probably in China like 4 weeks in 6 for those 3 years. I had a diplomatic visa because we were doing it through the British Embassy in Beijing. And it was really exciting, right? I got to do all these kind of cool things. I was like, when you're over there, it's kind of like, you're kind of treated like a celebrity because I was representing this great British institution with this big commercial project. I think we turned over just over $1 million in the first year on that project in profit for the charity. It was like really, really incredible. But like I was 25, I was managing a massive global team across like marketing and fundraising and I just was promoted beyond my ability and I lost control and I got in with a really funny crowd in Mayfair, which is where the office was. I went a bit mad. It's actually the Monaco Grand Prix last weekend, wasn't it? And that always reminds me because me and these friends from Mayfair used to rent a super yacht every year at Monaco and just do silly things. We'd go to a nightclub on a Wednesday night and it would be a £5,000 minimum spend table on a Wednesday and things like that. And I basically I lost myself for a year. I didn't look after my health. I'm diabetic, and my health went down the pan. I'm blind in one eye because of the way that I treated myself during that period of my life. It was a really, really serious kind of complication, and I collapsed. I burned out. I had a nervous breakdown. I went into work on a one day and I just put my laptop on the CEO's desk and was like, I'm not coming back. And I had a 6 month notice period. I was like, I don't sue me for the notice. I'm not coming back. I'll die if I keep coming back here. And I left London that night and I went to live with my mum for a year in Essex. And just
Oh,
I found psychotherapy and I just really recovered. I found all my values again. Found that I sold my Patek Philippe watch and my car and all these kind of silly trappings that I had, and I really got back to who I think I am authentically, and you know that that wasn't a single mistake. It was a series of mistakes during which escalated and during which time I kind of lost myself. But the big lesson that I learned from that is about learning one's limits, and I mean that kind of physically and emotionally and mentally, and also being kind to yourself and giving yourself the space to continue to be authentic, and to continue to be, listen to what your body's telling you and listen to what your brain's. I knew what I was doing was not good for me in any sense of that word, for at least for a full year, and I think that was, yeah, that was a really powerful lesson for me. And I'm all of you guys, you wouldn't be seen dead with me, the Mike of 2014, 2015. He was a dick. But I'm a very different person now. And I'm the same person, but I'm much more in touch with us. And I'm still in psychotherapy. I go to therapy every week, and it's been one of the most transformative, powerful experiences of my life. And yeah, I think, I really encourage any founder, however successful you are, don't lose sight of who you are. And don't lose sight of who you really are and who you can be, because it's so easy to do. It just takes 3 pints of beer in a pub with a group of Mayfair millionaires for me, and that was it. I kind of fell in love with their lifestyle and kind of became one of them. And this is super tragic and very sad. But one of those guys, I found out a lot later, we lost contact, but he was also a very unhappy man and trapped in this lifestyle, very kind of working class guy from Doncaster, and he took his own life. And I think you know that was because he'd lost himself in that kind of rat race for money and trying to find something that was meaningful to him. But yeah, it was a yeah, a really, really tough period of my life. There is a funny story from that period, in China, but I don't know whether I can segue directly into it, or you want to ask me anything, Steph, about
well, Mike, you definitely cannot segue into that because I just need a breather for a moment because I'm covered in goosebumps so that you probably can't see on camera, but I am keyword you said there was powerful. I'm definitely impacted. I feel emotionally, physically impacted by that story. I definitely did not see that coming. So I want to say thank you so much. You were saying before about, being vulnerable and being open, and it's all a process. So I want to say a big thank you, Mike, for sharing that with us. It's such an incredible story. Um, yeah, I just feel like I need to simmer for a sec before we
that.
can.
Sorry, yeah, I should have warned you that I was. I mean, I'm very open. I'm very open about this now, and I talk about it very openly. It's a big part of my recovery from that period of my life, is being open about it and not trying to hide it away. Because it has been a very it's been a real catalyst in creating the kind of mentor I am, the kind of partner I am to my girlfriend, the kind of uncle I am to my niece. All of that is impacted by this stuff. And I don't want, part of our role, I think, Steph, yours and mine as mentors at One Day, is to stop our founders from repeating our mistakes. It's why I suggested this event to Juan, because I think being open about the mistakes we've made and signposting, big red flag danger here is important. And that for me is such a big danger of, someone put hustle culture or kind
Yeah.
of you know, the success you have or lack of success either can drive you in. Because what was really weird about that time with those guys in Mayfair was I'd sold my business and I had like money in the bank, but I wasn't particularly successful then. Like I was earning good money as a kind of director, and but I was stuck in this thing where I had like some success, but I didn't feel successful enough. So I was kind of like, this crazy, £40,000 watch that I used to wear, and
Mm.
like things like that were just like not me at all,
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It is fascinating how we do get sucked into whether it's like materialism, consumption, or you said someone mentioned hustle culture. I do
uh,
think you also just need to mention here in the tech world, because this is the space where I know there's entrepreneurs, you're all building different, amazing, cool businesses, and would love to hear about them if you want to pop them in the chat and what your business is. But particularly in the tech world, we talk about VCs and scale ups and unicorns and exited founders. I mentioned before about how the hype around the TechCrunch articles, the sifted headlines, getting backed by, Balderton Capital or Atomico, like these are some of the tier one VCs here in the UK at least. And if we do, we were having a discussion earlier about social media. There's a lot of questions that came on that front. I've also definitely recognized if I spend too long on social media, I take on board the compliment you shared about what I post out there, but I need to create more than I consume, because if I'm consuming more, it's not good for my brain. I start getting and the success thing you mentioned, Mike, I start really beating myself up a lot. I really start like, why am I not as successful? Why have they got this? Why have got they? I'm working so hard. I'm working all these hours and putting all this effort in. And every single time I open up LinkedIn in particular, that's humble brag central. I see someone else has done this, someone else has done that. And, after I've calmed down, after this silly chimp in my mind has gone off on its ridiculous, like, whatever, I think I'm like, but wait, what is it? Why am I jealous about this? Did I even want that? I didn't even know VC exists. Do I want investors breathing down my neck? Do I want to be managing like international teams in different countries, whatever it might be, or wearing a Petite Philippe watch, whatever it might be? It's like, do I even want that? It's so easy to get caught up in everything. And I think what's such a privilege to have you here with us as well, Mike, is not only do we rarely get to hear the realities and what went on behind the scenes, but hearing someone who did actually have that quote unquote success, someone who did party in Mayfair, who was on the yachts in Monaco, someone who was wearing the Petite Philippe watch and driving a Porsche. I'm honest, there's some of that definitely still appeals to me because I've never had that. So I think it's also important here to someone who has had that to be like, it still didn't feel great.
I think the thing is, it's just like, and there's a lot of, you can watch loads and loads of good videos on this online and read loads of good articles. Like it's actually Jason Lemkin, who was a guy who had a SaaS business and exited to Adobe. And he had a business called Echo Sign. He writes a lot about this because he's obviously in this kind of like, stratospheric $100 million exit kind of founder club, and about how few people it's enough. Well, look at Bezos, right? Like the richest man in the history of the world. He seems to be optimizing his life for Instagram at the moment. Like that's not a contented and happy individual, right? Like so I think there is this like I think one of my big lessons has been around trying to figure out, and I'm not always like very, very good at it, but trying to figure out like what is enough. And what does good enough mean?
Mm,
And like for me, that's what therapy is super helpful for,
I
right?
love
It's like, engaging with what is enough for me. And
I love
actually a lot of the time for me at the moment, it's like, everyone wants to have some impact. So having a little impact on people's businesses through the work I do with Oneday, trying to
mm,
be a good partner to my girlfriend, trying to be a great uncle to my niece. Like these are the things now that I'm extraordinarily privileged, right? I have to look after my health more.
mm,
That's a big important thing to me at the moment and trying to do more with my health. But I'm privileged because I don't have to work, two jobs, and I do work two jobs because I do sort of consulting and
yeah, yeah.
I don't have to do two jobs in the way that we often conceive of people doing two jobs,
Yeah.
where they're doing it to make ends meet, and that comes from a place of extraordinary privilege, and I'm really, really like really happy to acknowledge that. But yeah, it is that, yeah, I think that's a good Alex has recommended in the chat, there's a Rob Walling podcast on what is enough. And I haven't seen it or heard it, so I will look it up. But yeah, I think yeah, that's my third big tragedy mistake.
Oh, Mike, I mean, you need some of your therapist details. I need like, oh, I'm breathing off that. But I think we've kind of had a little bit of that calm down to now. I think I'm ready. Hopefully our audience is also ready for the funny thing now.
Okay, well, I mean, it's been really built up now, Steph, so I have to really hope. Part of the work I was doing in China, obviously, I don't speak any Mandarin, and we were really lucky. We always had translators with us. And we were doing this big launch of the program. The program's called China Speaks. It's all about empowering. So China has a grand education policy, or did 10 years ago, about China on the world stage. It was about equipping Chinese young people with the ability to articulate and debate, particularly in English, because one of the challenges was Chinese students coming to Western universities, the educational paradigm is so different. So in like the Chinese educational system, it's learn by rote and there's not much like debate and challenge, particularly of teaching staff. Whereas obviously in Western universities, we're really encouraged to kind of like, the cut and thrust and debate things. Anyway, so I was asked to give this speech to senior members of the Chinese Communist Party Politburo, the education minister, and all of his kind of entourage were there, being spoken by through a translator. And I had this great ending I'd planned, and I was really excited for this really powerful ending to the speech. And I said, through the translator, obviously, I said, and we are delighted to be bringing to a whole new generation of Chinese school children the art of critical thinking. And I was like, that is going to boom, like that's going to land so well, because that's what this is all about. The translator obviously translates. There's no applause, dead silence in the room. And
No.
as one, the Chinese education minister and his Politburo stand up and storm out. And so obviously I'm thinking, well, I'm going to prison. Like this is I've obviously said something like this is
You're getting
we are
deported,
not
Mike.
in a kind of like particularly free state. Yes, I'm on a diplomatic passport, but what am I going to do here? So me and my kind of colleagues who were there on the trip, like went to this translation. Like, what did you say? Like, what did you say? Like, go back through it. And she had translated me as saying some of the most senior kind of politicians in the authoritarian state of China. We are delighted to bring to a whole new generation of Chinese school children the art of dissident thinking. So I had basically said that I was going to be training a whole new generation of government dissidents through this program. And so we had to like send all of our kind of Chinese counterparts out and bring them all back in. And everyone was like, there was a bit of kind of awkwardness. And then someone started laughing in the kind of Politburo, and then they all started, but honestly, and then we all went out and drank baijiu till 3 in the morning.
Oh, that's
But
hilarious.
yeah, it
And I
was a
bet that
real,
bonded you more than anything as well, like
yeah.
laughing over the silly mistake.
Yeah, it was a real, yeah. I mean, that I do like that story because it just shows like doing business abroad is always fraught with those kind of cultural and translation issues. But yeah, it was a real moment. What would Alex Ferguson have called it? A squeaky bum moment,
That's hilarious, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that. So,
Yeah.
so far. I think that's a really nice positive end to this session as well. Just on that note, if anyone is looking to scale their business and go international, just as you mentioned, sort of China business, Mike, The Culture Map is a great book that I recommend on dealing with different culture. Have you read it as well, Mike?
No, I'm noting it down because I want to read it. It sounds
Yeah,
good.
I read it and it's one of those classic like airport books. I just picked up my flight was delayed or cancelled. I was like, oh, actually. And there's lots of interesting kind of juicy bits in that, but maybe not so relevant to our founders who are maybe getting started or depending where you're at in your business. Um, Thank you all so much. Thank you to Samantha. I believe that Sam has copied all the questions that we haven't answered into our Slack channel. So we also want to keep that community Slack channel really active, engaging. So let's continue the conversation over there. Again, a reminder, if there's any stupid air quotes questions that you want to pop in the chat, that's the place to do it. It's a safe space. And of course, a massive thank you to you, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your incredible story.
No, look, it's been my absolute pleasure, and I know some of the founders in the room. Either I'm mentoring them or I've met them before, and it's great. Thank you so much for giving up your bank holiday, public holiday evening to spend with us today. I do really appreciate
Of course. I
it.
keep forgetting today's bank holiday in the UK, of course, Memorial Day in the US as well, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
well remembered, Mike.
That's right, and Yeah, Steph, have you got the QR code for the feed
Oh,
the founders as well? Can I remind?
switched on. So sorry. Thank you. Before
All
you all
right.
shoot, sorry, everyone. I know we're running a few minutes over. Yeah, I did actually have it copied and pasted over here. Please. Thanks for thank you
Yeah,
to you, Mike.
guys,
Let me just share the
that's all
slides
right.
again.
That's
Let
fine.
me just reshare just a second. So please do share your feedback with us. Of course, as entrepreneurs, we're all building, and part of building and developing something that's of value. We need you and your feedback to help us continue to make this better. Let us know what you enjoyed in particular, areas for improvement. Definitely Steph's tech abilities and keeping all the plates spinning is one of those areas for improvement. So just pop the link in the chat. Thank you, Mike, for the reminder.
That's all right.
And
Sorry.
you're more on the ball than I am. And yeah, I'll give you all a few minutes to just to fill that in just before we lose that link. And again, we'll be picking up those questions in the Q&A on the Slack channel.
Great, Steph. Thank you so much for being such a great host and for listening to me witter on for so long.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you for sharing such great lessons. And I was, yeah, not expecting such incredible stories. No, really appreciate you being so vulnerable and open here with us. This
My
is really
pleasure.
cool. Well done.
Well, I'm going to jump because I'm a few minutes late to my next one day call. So
Oh,
I'm gonna leave you guys to it, guys. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you all soon,
right.
hopefully. Ciao, bye bye.
Bye, bye, bye. Thank you.